WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin in flying solo as Tia Graham enjoys the week off. Today on the program, we're going to take a look at Detroit's historic place in the world of Negro League baseball, as well as find out a little bit more about Windsor Pizza and what our friends to the south, that's right, the south in Canada, enjoy when it comes to pie. But first, on the Metro. The Detroit Lions aren't the only local football team making waves in sports this year. Detroit's women's soccer team, Detroit City FC, recently made history by qualifying for their first ever playoff game. The team closed out the regular season, finishing atop the Great Lakes Division with an undefeated record of 10 wins, 2 draws, and no losses. That's right, we're talking about international football on today's show, not the American football that we're always used to. But it's with good reason, as the team is set to face off against Riverlight FC at Keyworth Stadium in Hamtramck tonight at 7 p.m. To learn more about our team and this remarkable accomplishment ahead of tonight's game, we're joined by defensive midfielder with DCFC, Kate Childers. Kate, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm pretty excited to talk to you about the season because, again, historic, first time our women's professional soccer team has made it to the playoffs. And you're kind of starting out on your career as part of the team. So before we even get into what happened with the season, I just want to learn from your perspective, someone out of Grand Blanc, did you ever think that you'd be representing a local team, us here in Southeast Michigan, in the world of semi-pro soccer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so grateful to have such a competitive yet fun and welcoming team to play for in the summer. You know, I never thought that we'd have the season that we've had, and it's just such a special group of girls and staff. So I'm just really grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah, so let's get into that then. Again, this is the first time you guys have ever made it to the team, so it's historic. No one will ever be able to take that from you. How did this happen? What was it about this season that made it special so far?
Yeah, we just have so much depth in our roster, so many girls from all over the area. And so just every game we've had, slightly different lineups, but our level just stays the same. Yeah. Just very consistent throughout.
And, you're starting out kind of on your soccer journey, too, because, you're playing double duty. You're playing for the Golden Gophers in Minnesota during the fall season and playing as well in the summer. What does it take to balance that kind of effort when you're playing soccer?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it's just so nice to have somewhere to play in the summer and kind of, keep the rust off and keep playing. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful.
Yeah, that's really cool. When I'm thinking about what soccer means to our area here, you have the chances to play over in Hamtramck as someone who's still, you're in your sophomore year, right? Or I'm sorry, you're going in your junior year with Minnesota? But so
going into my sophomore year.
Going into your sophomore year. So for you, like starting out on this journey, it's an opportunity to really see kind of both sides of sports. So what's the difference for you playing college ball versus playing in this paid league like you're doing in the summer? What differences have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'm just so pumped to play at home at Keyworth. Yeah. I mean, the fans are just unreal. If you've ever been, it's just like such an experience. But I think it's almost like there's a little less pressure when you're playing for a summer league, but at the same time, it's still, the competitiveness is still there. So I think it's just kind of that mentality switch of like, okay, this is like, it's different, but just like the level is still there.
Yeah, that level is pretty high. It has
that more fun aspect to it.
Well, let's get into some of the fun then, because again, as we're speaking with Kate Childers, who's a defensive midfielder with DCFC, the fun's going to be happening. I'm sure the crowd will be rocking tonight at Keyworth, Hamtramck, 7 p.m. For those who are following the team, for you guys as players, what's it like playing in that kind of environment? What's it been like dealing with the fans and that local connection to this team this season?
It's been so special. I mean, we can do everything to kind of hype ourselves up, but once we get out there and all the smoke and the yelling and the chants as we're being announced, it just really makes us feel special.
Is there a favorite chant that you have? I mean, what's the chant that they really need to get out there to get you guys going? We can tip them off right now so people are ready to go.
Many.
What's your favorite one, though, right?
I think it's just when they just say Detroit City.
Yeah.
It's like Detroit City till I die. That's like one of their famous ones.
And, we take pride in our city. One reason I know, Kate, that you take pride in your work on the soccer pitch, as we might say, is because when I was looking up the stats, I noticed that you were leading in a specific stat for the team. Do you know what that stat is?
I'm not sure.
Yellow cards.
What is it? Oh.
What's the story behind you and tussling up with the refs? Do they have just a tight whistle on you, or is that just your kind of aggressive nature out there, giving that yellow card warning to you out there on the pitch? Are those deserved, or what's happening?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, maybe some deserved, but no, I just really get into it and get competitive. So sometimes doesn't go your way.
But as a defensive midfielder, that is true. No reds, that's showing that you can get right up to the line, but not necessarily have to go over it. So that's cool. So what's it going to take for you guys to bring home the championship? What's that going to look like here for the team?
We've stuck to our formation this whole year. So I think, and we just kind of try to play our game each game. Obviously, we somewhat scout the other team, but we just stayed true to how we play. So I think just carrying that over into playoffs, there's no need to make any changes. I mean, like you said earlier, we're undefeated, no losses, and we rarely conceded any goals, which we take a lot of pride in. So I think just getting out there on the front foot, scoring early, and just playing how we play.
Yeah. That defensive-minded football, especially for someone who's a defensive midfielder, I know that's going to be important to you guys again. But Kate Childers, defensive midfielder with DCFC's women's team, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro, and good luck tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. DCFC's women's team, again, will kick off their first ever playoff game tonight at 7 p.m. You can watch the action online at CBS Detroit or via DCFC's YouTube channel. Keep it locked right here, though. Coming up, we'll discuss what it means now that Major League Baseball has decided to include Negro League statistics in all baseball statistics, getting into Detroit's connection with Negro League Baseball historically when we return on the Metro. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. We're talking about sports there as we are excited about seeing our women's team for the first time ever make their way to the playoffs. Hamtramck is going to be the site of that, but Hamtramck has a connection not only to soccer currently, but Negro League Baseball historically. And that's been in focus a lot for us recently because Major League Baseball decided to include statistics from the Negro Leagues in their official record book. In doing so, it's highlighted many prominent black baseball players, including Josh Gibson, who played for the Homestead Grays in Pittsburgh and D.C., who's now the all-time Major League batting champion, a spot once held by the Tigers' Ty Cobb. It's also put Detroit Stars' Norman Turkey Stearns in elite company on the MLB all-time career slugging list, such an important statistic showing how people hit in baseball. He's number 5 behind Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Lou Gehrig, and Mule Suttles, all legends in the game. Like I mentioned, though, the Stars played at Hamtramck Stadium, one of 12 Negro League baseball stadiums still standing and receiving recognition on May 2nd from Governor Gretchen Whitmer. To learn more about Hamtramck Stadium and the Negro Leagues, I spoke with Vanessa Ivy Rose. She's the vice chair for the Friends of Historic Hamtramck Stadium and granddaughter of Norman Turkey Stearns, who again played for our Detroit Stars. I started our conversation by asking about Vanessa's connection to America's pastime.
Well, I was blessed to have my grandmother, Nettie Stearns, who was married to my grandfather in my life for so long. And when I was 7 years old, I would sit on her living room floor and we would watch the Tigers together. And so really that was my first introduction to baseball. And, I was marveling at her like, man, why does she love the Tigers so much? And who are the Tigers? And, what does baseball mean to our family? And over the years, she educated me so much, in addition to my mom and my aunt as well, about what my grandfather's legacy was all about. Who he was as a person, of course, but, who he was in terms of baseball and why baseball was the story of American history. And so my grandmother would share with me stories about, the Klan chasing teams from city to city and how horrific that was. And she educated me about the Jim Crow era. But, one thing that was constant was she would always talk about my grandfather's perseverance and his ability to remain focused and to not be bitter about the conditions that he faced.
When you talk about legends of the game, Turkey Stearns, obviously, he absolutely is one of those. Before we get into the stories you mentioned about just how much the history of the Negro Leagues, what your research has come up there, and the struggles that players had then in those leagues, I just want to focus in on Norman Turkey Stearns, because you're right, not a lot of people have had a chance to hear about his life and legacy. What can you tell us about your grandfather?
He was a 5-tool player. He was a power hitter. He was a very dynamic center fielder. And he had a unique batting stance and a unique way of running the bases. And many people say that's why, he earned the nickname Turkey by, sticking his chest out when he ran and flapping his arms. Although he said that when he was a kid, he had a pot belly.
Oh, is he just trying to duck the teasing for his running style? Or you've done the research. Is it pot belly or is it running style? What do you think it is?
I mean, I definitely think it was pot belly, okay. But I think that, as he began to play, obviously a lot of other things resembled the turkey too, and so the name just stuck. Ron Teasley, who's a 97-year-old living Negro Leagues legend, actually played with my grandfather when they were on the Toledo Cubs together, and so he said that he had a very long neck, and people would call him the Gobbler too, as well, in addition to Turkey. So there's a lot of cool stories out there. One of the greatest nicknames in baseball, I think, and a lot of other people have said that too.
I can only imagine for you, again, with a guy with a name like that, there's got to be some interesting stories or hooks, maybe something people don't quite know about your grandfather. Is there any interesting Norman Turkey Stearns story that not a lot of people have heard about that you can tell us about?
Well, I think most people don't realize that he, was working at the same time that he was playing baseball. I mean, and that's so unusual for a professional athlete, right? But, he worked at Briggs Manufacturing at one point, and it was shocking for me to find out that, Walter Briggs also owned the Detroit Tigers at the same time as he owned the manufacturing auto plant. And so to have my grandfather in that space working for him, working on his cars and not allowing him the opportunity to shine on the baseball diamond is just astounding to me. And most people don't realize that, he could have had the opportunity to play for the Tigers, of course, because of his talent. But look at how much closer he also was to having that opportunity as well, working for a man like Briggs, who actually said, no jigs with Briggs, no jigaboos with Briggs. So he was very firm in his stance of not recognizing my grandfather or other black men as human.
We celebrate what Jackie Robinson did when he was able to break the color barrier, but that's happening on the back end of the struggles that athletes like your grandfather had in being part of the Negro League. Can you tell us what you've learned and some of the stories you have about what that experience was like for these athletes?
I mean, it's interesting because on one hand, they were thriving and helping the black community so much, because of the popularity of black baseball during the time, but also at the same time, they were battling Jim Crow. And so if you study, the history of our country during that time, thousands of black people were lynched during that time. And so I think a lot of people just don't realize, that when you were trying to travel, for example, during that time, that you would be denied the opportunity to sleep in a hotel. that she would be denied the opportunity to get food. And so my grandmother told me many times about Grandpa traveling on the road with the team and stopping at a place to get food, and how a lot of times they just wouldn't serve them at all. But sometimes if they would serve them, they would say, okay, you have to go around back, and then we'll give you some scraps. So think about, the nutrition that you would need and the nourishment that you would need to, play baseball at a high level, and the opportunity to rest your head and to, refresh your body so that you could go out there on the field and give it your all. They weren't given the opportunity to have the luxuries that many athletes have today, and yet they still excelled at such a high level. It's really unthinkable. And it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, and you can see that with the integration now of the statistics from the Negro League, now that Major League Baseball is recognizing them, really giving due to some of these amazing players here, some of these black athletes that were doing things out there, and really even showed when they had opportunities to play against some of the white-only teams, how they played a great brand of baseball, even beating those teams when the opportunities came. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think most people don't realize that they did actually play against, white players and players who were in MLB, even though, a lot of people were upset about the inclusion of the statistics because they're like, oh, they didn't play against them and, this is not fair, and they didn't have as many plate appearances. But those people actually don't know about barnstorming and haven't done that research to see how well the Negro Leaguers fared when they would actually play against white competition, and how often they were winning those games too as well. And many people who are on those lists, I think that if they were here today, if a Babe Ruth was here today, or Ty Cobb were here today, they could speak about the talent that the Negro Leagues players exhibited because they saw it firsthand. And so there was no question about if they could play. It was just the only question that remained really was, when will society recognize black players as human and as equal and as worthy?
And speaking of seeing some of these athletes play, if you were around here locally at the time, one place you might have been able to see that is over at Hamtramck Stadium, the historic stadium there. What can you tell us, Vanessa, about Hamtramck Stadium and the role it played in the Negro Leagues?
Yeah, the fact that it's still remaining, first of all, is just amazing. One of 5 Negro Leagues stadium still standing, but it was home to the Detroit Stars, or one of the homes of the Detroit Stars, and they've done a great job over there of renaming the field after Norman Turkey Stearns. So it's the longest name ever, right? Norman Turkey Stearns Field at historic Hamtramck Stadium. I know that's a mouthful for people to say, but it does tell you the history of that sacred field, right? And so having the opportunity to still go to that field and having people play baseball there now. Like when we just had that Juneteenth event, for example, the young people understood the history of the Detroit Stars and how those players had paved the way for them, how if there were no Detroit Stars, then there would be, no opportunity for them right now. And so they recognize that connection, which is beautiful to see. And these young kids, they were they're getting ready to go play college baseball. And they were participating in a home run derby, and they were showcasing their talents, and I had the opportunity to talk to quite a few of them. And they're outstanding young men, great heads on their shoulders, very focused on their academics. They understood the value of being student athletes. And I think that was very representative of the beauty of the Negro Leagues, too, that, back then the Negro League players understood their importance to the community, that they were role models, that they were there to provide joy and excitement and uplift, and it was an opportunity to, have some reprieve, given all that was happening during the time and the social conditions that were pretty horrific. So these young people understood that they have an opportunity and how blessed they are, and they were out there, exemplifying black excellence, which is really what the Negro Leagues was about, too.
That was Vanessa Ivy Rose. And if you'd like to learn more about the Negro Leagues, Rose produced a 6-part podcast for ABC called Reclaimed the Forgotten League. You can check that out wherever you get your best podcasts, your favorite podcast here. This is The Metro. 1019 WDET. We just heard about the Negro Leagues in baseball here in Detroit. Our current team could probably use some players like Norman Turkey Stearns as the Tigers lost to the Twins 12-3 in Minnesota in their most recent game, a rain-shortened game as well. They play the Reds this evening at 7:10 p.m. Looking forward to hopefully turning it back around as Detroit has lost 18 of its last 26 games. Need some good luck there. Maybe it will come from AAA. They just brought back center fielder Parker Meadows from AAA Toledo. I bring that up because this week I got a chance to see a AAA game. Drove down to AAA to watch the Mud Hens play in Toledo. It was a pretty cool experience. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the team down there, tickets a little bit cheaper and you get closer access to see these guys play. That is an option for you as well if you want some baseball. Something to do this summer, as we do have a lot of hot weather that we're dealing with, trying to figure out how to cool off. With heat alerts across the country, we're looking at possibly more records being broken in terms of heat for the summer. In fact, public housing residents are disproportionately vulnerable to heat illness, yet there's no federal mandate to provide them air conditioning. So as all of us try to figure out what is best when it comes to helping cool off during this summer, we've got to figure out some ways to do it. And the Department of Housing and Urban Development has allowed local housing agencies to subsidize tenants' heating bills. Still, many could not subsidize costs tied to cooling. New HUD policies, however, change this, but critics say it still falls too short. NPR's Aisha Roscoe spoke to reporter Jennifer Ludden on the new policy.
So this might be a surprise to some listeners that public housing agencies have not been allowed to pay for cooling. What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, it does seem odd these days. But, first of all, most public housing buildings are decades old. They were built before central air was really common. And this policy is decades old, back to when in a lot of the country, you really did not need air conditioning. So it has meant that agencies can subsidize people's heating bills. But if residents want to get an AC unit, they have to buy it themselves. And with some exceptions, residents largely pay for that extra electricity themselves. If utilities are included with rent, this means a surcharge. And for people with extremely low incomes, even a small bit extra every month can be too much. So a lot of people don't use their AC to save money. And this is especially dangerous because public housing residents are disproportionately vulnerable to extreme heat. Many of them are seniors or children, or they have chronic health problems. Back in 2021, this got a lot of attention because 7 people in public housing died in a heat wave in Portland, Oregon.
So what is the new guidance from the Biden administration?
Basically, it says during a period of extreme heat, public housing agencies are now allowed to pay for an individual resident's cooling cost, not an AC unit, just the utility bill. But this is an option, not a mandate, and the resident has to ask for that help. Now, the Department of Housing and Urban Development defined what it means by extreme heat event. It says that's a period of severe heat and humidity with temperatures 90 degrees or more for at least 2 to 3 days, but local agencies can use their own definition of what will trigger these payments. Now, HUD officials say this is going to let people use AC when they need it without risking heat-related illness, knowing they don't have to worry about cutting back on food or medicine in order to just stay cool.
But as you say, this is only an option, and public housing authorities are not required to pay for AC. So how much difference will this make?
I spoke with Daniel Carpenter-Gold with the Public Health Law Center. He says, okay, it is good HUD has taken this step, but he calls it a very small step and worries it won't change much. For one thing, it doesn't do anything for people who don't already have AC. And for those who do, he says the agency is basically their landlord. So that can be a tricky relationship, and it might be a hard ask for some people. And Carpenter-Gold says, we don't know how this message is going to be put out to tenants.
They might not get the notice in the first place that this is a thing, and the residents might not apply in time for them to actually feel like they can turn on their AC or whatever they have when the heat strikes.
He also says agencies would need to come up with a whole system for approving and organizing these payments, but many of them are cash strapped, they're understaffed. And he says, look, there's a much simpler way. There already are federal subsidies for heating bills. So his group and others have petitioned to get Washington to include cooling costs in the summer for everybody. Of course, that would be a long bureaucratic process to get done.
I'm curious, how does clean energy fit into all this? President Biden got Congress to approve massive funding for communities to switch to heat pumps and solar. Is there money for local public housing agencies to do something like that?
Yes, there is, and the administration is pushing this for public housing. Absolutely. They say that, for people with very low incomes, this not only reduces planet warming emissions, it brings down their utility bills, but only a sliver of that funding that Congress approved is for public housing. Carpenter Gold, the analyst, says that for a real solution here, he'd like to see Congress devote a much larger chunk specifically for these retrofits in public housing.
That was NPR's Jennifer Ludden speaking with Aisha Roscoe. This is The Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we'll discuss a new documentary film about pizza in Windsor. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. It's been a holiday week, as yesterday was, of course, Independence Day, and happy belated 4th of July to all of you. Hopefully you had a good time with that. But Canada Day was Monday this week, and when you celebrate Canada Day in Windsor, it probably comes with some pizza. WDET's Adam Fox has the story about the famous pizza pies hailing from our cousins to the south in Windsor.
Windsor has many things in common with its bigger international sibling, Detroit. It's the automotive capital of its respective country. It's a blue-collar town built on labor and manufacturing, and it's also a world-class pizza city. Okay, well, maybe that last part is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's true that Windsor boasts a unique style of pizza that locals claim can compete with the best slices anywhere. And yet, just across the river, this style of pizza is relatively unknown. As an expat Windsorite living in Detroit, I feel it's my civic duty to help educate Detroiters on the great slices awaiting them across the border. George Kalivas was born and raised in Windsor and makes his living in music and management in Toronto, but his passion for the pizza of his hometown, combined with a downturn in the music industry during the global pandemic, led him on a path of Windsor cultural evangelism. In 2022, he released the documentary film, The Pizza City You've Never Heard Of. George joined us from his home in Toronto. For the uninitiated, what is Windsor-style pizza?
All right, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, it all starts with the crust. So a lot of people say we're right in the middle between thick and thin, not as thick as a Sicilian, but not as thin as a New York slice. We use a bread baking technique that's made up of a heavy cornmeal and flour recipe. And I mean heavy cornmeal. So not a lot of people do that. You can find cornmeal in some tavern-style pizzas in Chicago, but we're not nearly as thin. The second thing is the sauce. So our sauce has a sweet taste to it and also a little bit of a spice. The third most important thing is the cheese, Galati cheese. The cheese is made locally in Windsor by Galati Cheese Company. It's a high-fat mozzarella that you can only find in southwestern Ontario. We have the most pizzerias per capita in the country. So some of these places have over 20 locations in the same city. Some have 18, some have 16, 12, 10, all in Windsor. And every single one of them is using Galati cheese. And they have to prove it by putting a Galati seal of approval on each box, just to let the locals know that they're not playing games. And then last but not least, man, you can spot a Windsor-style pizza from a mile away based on the toppings that we do. So Windsor is famous for shredded pepperoni. The most famous way to eat a Windsor-style pizza is called a super. It's shredded pepperoni, canned mushroom, green pepper, and bacon.
You're not a pizza maker, though you sound like one. What led you to make this doc?
So the idea for the Pizza City You've Never Heard Of came to me when I was like 18 years old. After high school, I moved to New York City for school, and I was quickly introduced to the famous New York slice. My friends took me around to all these legendary places like John's of Bleecker, DiFara Joe's, all these places you see on TV shows, and they were all incredible. Each time that we would leave one of these places, I would look at my friends and say the same thing, and I would say, you know, you guys should try the pizza from my hometown, and they would look at me like I was completely insane. And that conversation became a continuous thing throughout my life. Over the last 15 years, I've traveled all over North America for work. I've been to every famous pizza city in the world, and I've tried every legendary spot over and over. And I just started to notice a lot of similarities between Windsor and those cities, especially with respect to the families and stories behind these institutions. And it has validated the idea I had when I was 18 that Windsor had to, it deserves to be in the conversation for top pizza cities.
Dean Litzter is owner and pizza chef at Armando's, Amherstburg, and Leamington. He's an award-winning pizza maker who holds the title of Best Canadian Pizza Chef in 2019. He also brought traditional Windsor-style pizza to the ultimate test at the International Pizza Expo in Las Vegas and took home third place against pizzaiolos from around the world. Tell us a little bit about what led you to this this career and this passion you have. And for folks that are listening but maybe can't see you, Dean, you have a pizza slice tattooed on your face.
Yes.
On like close to your ear, I think, right?
Yeah, it's like my sideburn.
Your sideburn. You have a pizza.
My whole arm is pizza tattoos.
You are covered in pizza tattoos.
My palm is a pizza slice. And
so fair to say you're probably not going to be changing careers anytime soon.
Yeah, going into HVAC at this point might be a little awkward.
What led you to this? Why pizza? What led you to this obsession?
Well, it started like a regular job like anyone else. I was 15, making pizzas. They taught me how to make pizzas, folding boxes, shredding cheese, all the things as like a lower end person trying to learn. And, I went through high school and then I went to college. And then at the end, I was kind of like not sure what to do. And, they presented me an opportunity to start running one of their restaurants. And the other career that I was looking at kind of offered an opportunity, and the pizza one just is where it kind of fell. And at that point, I was like, well, if this is what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go all in, and I'm going to go so off the deep end you think something's wrong with me. My bosses really saw that I was taking an interest, and that's when they sent me to Vegas. We started sitting in pizza seminars and watching competitions, and then I was like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we competing too? And then that next year is when things really started to get rolling.
And it did get rolling. In fact, you won title of Best Canadian Pizza Chef in 2019. The competition must have been fierce for that.
Yeah, that's one I'd been going to for many years. That took many years to finally break through to that. A lot of 8th place, 10th place, 6th place, nothing really happening. And it took a lot of really hard work and to come up with something different to do it.
What does pizza mean to Windsor?
Windsor pizza is a symbol of the family over everything vibe that Windsor, Ontario has. So, these local pizzerias have become pillars in our community, and these businesses are just much more than a quick food option to us. It's literally a part of everything we do. Sports, birthday parties, Wednesday night dinners with your family. There's always a pizza box in the background.
So, we're speaking to primarily Metro Detroiters here, George. Windsor style, does it compete with Detroit style pizza? Does it hold a candle to that?
Listen, man, we're talking about apples to oranges, but I'll tell you this. Everybody in Windsor has cousins in the D. We spend a lot of time over there. We have nothing but respect for Detroit pizza. So massive shout out to Buddy's, Louie's. Whenever we're in Detroit with people from out of town, those are the guarantee spots we always go to outside of Sweetwater. And I'll say this, Jets Pizza is unreal. Shout out to Jets Pizza. It's a delicacy, and people need to know that.
And shout outs to George Kalivas, director of the documentary film The Pizza You've Never Heard Of, and award-winning pizza chef Dean Litzter, who you just heard from. They spoke to WDET's Adam Fox. This is the Metro, and as we discussed this week, we've been celebrating our relationship with Canada, not just here on this show, but also with all of our shows, including Stephen Henderson and Created Equal. But while we have lots to celebrate about the positive aspects, there's also some of the more painful portions of that history, both here and in Canada. Earlier this week, Stephen Henderson spoke with scholar Dr. Tricia Logan from the University of British Columbia about the residential schools in Canada that were the sites of abuse for First Nations people after Canada was founded.
I want to start with a quote and then a question. And here's the quote. It says, "If anything is to be done with the Indian, we must catch him very young. The children must be kept constantly within the circle of civilized conditions." Now, I think that quote really characterizes the Canadian government's ideas about indigenous people, the threat that they posed to colonialism and colonial instincts, and the mission that that countries like Canada had to assimilate indigenous people into European culture. Shortly after this kind of idea comes about, the government establishes these residential schools. Who came up with the idea that this was the way to do this?
From the start, it was always a joint partnership between the growing nation of Canada before Canada even became Canada, when it was still the Dominion and a British colony, and churches that had presence in Canada since the 1500s, 1600s. Protestant and Catholic church entities had set up missions all across Canada. And, there was this kind of expectant capitalism of the fur trade and timber and kind of colonial incursions into Canada. And through that partnership, it was built on a system of industrial boarding schools, industrial kind of residential schools, based on a very Western European model that was seen in the United States and different colonial contexts as well, in Sweden, in Russia. These ideas of forcibly removing Indigenous children from their homes and from their families to assimilate, Christianize, and quote unquote civilize populations, generations of Indigenous children, with the kind of the impetus that the effort from the government to quote unquote settle and to kind of extract resources, to obtain land, to give land, to kind of transfer land from what they thought was what would have been thought of as kind of heathen or savage use of the land, to agrarian kind of agricultural, more European style of using the land. And doing that, there were a lot of very violent means to do that. And one of the ways was through a residential boarding school system. There were officials that went into the United States in the late 1800s to look at the boarding school system that was operating there, and reported back to the government of Canada and implemented a very similar system, analogous to a lot of these kind of workhouse boarding school, industrial school styles, thinking that good work, good hard work will make, and good Christian, Catholic, or Protestant work will make good Canadian citizens.
Yeah. We should talk about the living conditions in these schools, as you point out. These were more like work camps, I think, is maybe an accurate way to describe them, than they were schools or educational settings. Is that fair?
That's fair, yes. And I should preface this by saying, when I'm kind of making broad statements about the system in Canada and what the conditions were like, I received a lot of this history from residential school survivors, First Nations and Métis and Inuit people who attended the schools. It was a lot of my work for the last 25 years has been to record testimonies from survivors, and often what they tell, what their recollection is of kind of day-to-day life inside the schools. And I think this was generations of kids' experience, is they remember work, then they remember prayer, and they remember church indoctrination, most as well as kind of very horrific experiences of physical and sexual abuse. I think the day-to-day life, the conditions that people reflect on and remember as a child are about work, and often forced labor. It was large farms, large agricultural farms with livestock and grains and gardens, and some had kind of blacksmith shops and carpentry and sewing and laundry, where a lot of that labor, and some of it that produced vegetables and grains and livestock, a lot of that production went to kind of cooperative farms and were sold, and the children rarely ate the good food and the good vegetables, and thought a lot of that labor was exploitative.
That was Dr. Tricia Logan from the University of British Columbia. She spoke with Stephen Henderson on Created Equal earlier this week. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. We're going to learn a little bit more about fireworks safety in a moment, but first, in local news, the city of Dearborn was awarded for their work on public health and climate policies. The U.S. Conference of Mayors recently recognized the city for its work, and Ali Abazid is the city's chief public health officer. He tells WDET's Nargis Rahman that the award recognizes the department's hard work over the past 2 years. We'll learn more about that a little bit down the line, but coming up, we're going to take a look at what you can do for fireworks safety, as today, July 5th, it's technically the last day you can officially use fireworks in the city. To learn more about how to do it safely, we'll find out more about that conversation I had when we return on the Metro. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, and as mentioned, the U.S. Conference of Mayors recognized the city of Dearborn for its work on public health and climate policy. WDET's Nargis Rahman spoke with Ali Abazid, the city's chief public health officer.
So it's really exciting to see this public health model of governance that we're piloting here in Dearborn get some national recognition for that work.
What does it mean to receive this award?
It's basically confirmation 2 years in that what we're doing is working. That said, I think it's a good metric to see how the narrative is playing out, both locally, regionally, and then nationally. I've made no secret that one of the ambitions of this department is, yes, to build a culturally competent, tailored health department for the city of Dearborn and its unique demographics, but also to scale this model to other cities across the country. And so it's a good recognition to know that we're being recognized by mayors and people that are closest to their communities for the work that this department is doing.
I know there are certain things you're working on in terms of climate change in the city. Was there any specific ones that were recognized for this particular award?
So much of what we do as a department is really building and imbuing health tentacles in every single department across the city. So much of that work is behind the scenes. But some of the important stuff that we did as soon as we launched, the city receives millions of dollars in federal funds, for example, from CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funds. And historically, those funds have always been utilized through the prism of economic development considerations. And so that's $27 million that are now being implemented across the city, whether it's in rain gardens, whether it's in bioswales, whether it's in flood retention measures, whether it's in permeable pavers and infrastructure. That's what the public health lens allows us to do. Beyond that, we recently, over the last 6 months, struck up a really important partnership with the University of Michigan Law School's Environmental Law and Sustainability Clinic. They are taking a comprehensive look at all of our city policies and ordinances to find opportunities for us to implement more environmental and climate change related initiatives across the city. And so there's so much happening around urban forestry, around tree canopy coverage, around parks and recreation, and it's really exciting to see that these programs are being recognized.
Your department has been around for about 2 years. What are some highlights that you'd like to mention about the work you're doing?
Narcan vending machine that's placed at the Dearborn train station was placed there in November 2022, and I'm really proud that the Dearborn public has taken advantage of this intervention. We've dispensed over close to 6,000 units of Narcan, and I like to say that that's 6,000 units of life-saving potential that's out in the streets rather than sitting in a box in a warehouse somewhere. We recently launched a comprehensive air quality monitoring program where residents can sign up for alerts to air quality monitors that are closest in their neighborhoods. Air quality days are increasing in frequency as climate change increases the frequency of heat waves. And so our residents are now able to make decisions on where they live, learn, work, and play based on more minute data in their neighborhoods. I'm also really excited that, one of the things that we don't often talk about publicly is that I've had 115 fellows come through my department, and then they're going back into their communities. They're going back to their incredible, exemplary professional careers, and they're then seeding public health the way that we do it here in Dearborn.
What's next for the city of Dearborn's health department?
To start taking some of the findings from the University of Michigan Law School's program, for example, and to start thinking about what does policy implementation look like? How do we redo some of our ordinances? How do we think about housing shortages, both in Dearborn and across the state, because it is a national issue? How do we think about affordability, whether that's with environmental solar panels or whether that's remediating flooding as a result of increased rainfall? How do we work with the state and the federal government to make sure that we're receiving the funds that we receive? This department has received close to $5 million in 2 years from funding from all sources. That's $5 million than we would have had if this department didn't exist. And so I like to remind people that investing in public health is one of the best investments that government can make. For every dollar you invest in local government and public health, you're returning about $14 to $15. But I think the more important thing is that when you invest in public health, you're improving people's health and well-being. And it's also time to reconsider how we measure the economic health of a community, and that includes public health measurements too.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and while the 4th of July might be past, we know some of you still want to do the fireworks thing, but we want you to do it safely, and that's why I spoke with Paul Rogers, a fire prevention specialist with the Department of Natural Resources, beginning our conversation asking how summer droughts can make lighting off fireworks more dangerous.
We're still seeing some. We actually, I live over on the west side of the state, and we actually had some hayfield fires last week. So with that drought, it is drying out the grass enough that even half of my yard is actually very brown. So we are starting to see the drought kick back in again. It normally happens starting from now until Labor Day. We see it. So it is still a factor, and just need to keep mindful of that, because it only takes, after a good rain, and now that we're in full green up, it only takes 3 to 4 days for things to start to turn brown and really dry out again.
Yeah. Paul, you wouldn't like me to admit this to you, and I wasn't one of the folks doing this, but I remember growing up, people taking bottle rockets, firing them at each other, for example, your sparklers, lots of things with fireworks, probably not the most safe thing to do.
80s kid.
For you, yeah. Is that obvious?
Yeah.
What is the most misunderstood rule or state regulation we have around fireworks that you run into?
Yeah, as the DNR, we don't actually regulate the fireworks rules, but one question we do get asked is, people think that because Michigan passed a new fireworks law, they can, shoot off these big fireworks anytime they want, and really you can't. The designated times are the day before the holiday, the day of the holiday, and the day after.
Ooh.
And so we ask people, please be kind to your neighbors and make sure they're allowed by your local community, number one. But, be kind and use them around the 4th as they should. So, and then, of course, keeping everything safe in mind and making sure, especially one of the big things is making sure there's adult supervision nearby so they can keep a watch on the kids. And then the big thing that we request is, being the DNR, is, the wildfire scenarios and fires. It doesn't have to be the big ones you see out west, which Michigan has big ones too, but it's any grass lighting on fire. So try not to shoot them into the woods. We've had them before where, people were shooting them off into the woods, and then 3 days later they just sit in there and just kind of smolder, and then they start to burn, and then we get called in. So,
yeah.
We do get several of those every year. It happens. So, shoot them into a vacant lot or somewhere where, that they're not going to catch the grass on fire and take off. And we always stress, make sure you have water nearby.
And that's going to do it for the Metro here on 101.9 WDET-FM, as we just heard from Paul Rogers, a fire prevention specialist with the Department of Natural Resources. Make sure that you are enjoying fireworks safely, as we mentioned. But as I said, that's going to do it for this edition of the show. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, with additional production support from Anel Scott and Sydney Walkley. Our engineer is Nate Bender, and the music is by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll talk again on Monday.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.